There is a dangerous illusion at the heart of wealth. That money belongs to the person who works hardest for it. History repeatedly proves otherwise. Fortunes do not simply accumulate around the strongest worker, the most educated scholar, or even the most talented merchant. They accumulate around those who understand position, those who know where power is moving before everyone else notices, those who understand that wealth is not merely something earned, it is something organized, defended, multiplied, and above all, controlled. Niccolo Machiavelli understood this long before the modern financial system existed. He lived in a world where kingdoms could disappear between sunrise and sunset, where bankers could finance wars, where alliances were temporary, loyalty was negotiable, and a man's fortune could depend upon whether a powerful family considered him useful or disposable. Cinematic slow-motion shot of an antique Florentine ledger opening beneath flickering candlelight, handwritten numbers surrounded by dark wooden tables. Florence was not simply a beautiful Renaissance city. It was a battlefield disguised as civilization. Behind magnificent palaces stood competing banking families. Behind diplomatic ceremonies stood threats of invasion. Behind religious language stood financial interests. Behind marriages stood alliances. And behind alliances stood calculation. In such a world, Machiavelli learned a principle that modern people often discover too late. The visible economy is only the facade. Beneath it operates another economy, the economy of influence, access, information, scarcity, trust, fear, timing, and leverage. And this is where his ideas become strangely relevant to wealth. Because if you study the great fortunes of history, you discover that their creators rarely became powerful simply by possessing money. They became powerful by controlling something other people needed: a route, a resource, a network, a market, a technology, a source of information, a relationship, a bottleneck, or simply the confidence that allowed others to entrust them with capital. That distinction changes everything. Imagine two merchants in Renaissance Florence. Both work 12 hours a day. Both understand arithmetic. Both purchase goods and sell them for profit. But one merchant has access to information before the other. He knows which road is becoming dangerous. He knows which political alliance is collapsing. He knows which commodity will become scarce. He knows which noble family is desperate for credit. He knows which port is closing. He knows which ruler is preparing for war. The second merchant sees the market. The first sees the forces moving the market. And that is asymmetry. The first does not necessarily work harder. He simply acts from a superior position. Cinematic overhead shot of Renaissance Florence at dawn, merchants moving through narrow streets while shadowy figures observe from balconies. What history forgets to tell you about many great victories is that the decisive move often occurred before the battle became visible. The same is true of wealth. By the time everyone sees the opportunity may already belong to someone else. The crowd notices rising prices. The strategist notices why they are rising. The crowd sees a successful company. The strategist studies the distribution network beneath it. The crowd sees an investor becoming wealthy. The strategist asks who supplies that investor with information, capital, access, and protection. The crowd sees the fortune. The strategist studies the machinery producing the fortune. This was Machiavelli's deeper world, a world where appearances mattered enormously, but where appearances could also be manipulated. He understood the optical illusion of power. A ruler might appear powerful because thousands obeyed him, but perhaps those thousands obeyed because one institution controlled the money. A merchant might appear wealthy because he owned magnificent property, but perhaps his true power came from controlling credit. A political leader might appear independent, but perhaps his survival depended upon a small group of financiers. The visible asset was not always the decisive asset. The hidden dependency was. Cinematic close-up of gold coins arranged beside a sealed diplomatic letter, with a dagger casting a long shadow across the table. This is the first great lesson of Machiavellian wealth. Do not ask only, how can I make more money? Ask a more dangerous question. What must other people depend upon? Because dependency creates leverage, and leverage is what transforms income into power. A person who earns money but remains completely dependent upon one employer possesses income. A person who builds several valuable skills, controls relationships, owns productive assets, and can move between opportunities possesses leverage. The difference is enormous. Income can disappear, leverage can survive, a salary can be withdrawn, a productive asset can continue generating value, a customer can leave, a network can produce another customer, a market can collapse, but someone who understands capital allocation may move into another market. This is why Machiavellian thinking is fundamentally different from simple greed. Greed asks, how much can I take? Strategy asks, how can I position myself so value repeatedly flows toward me? That is a colder question. It forces you to stop thinking like a worker chasing individual rewards and begin thinking like a strategist designing a system. And systems compound. Cinematic tracking shot through an enormous Renaissance counting house, clerks recording transactions while wealthy patrons whisper behind curtains. Consider the banking families of Renaissance Italy. Their power did not come merely from storing coins. Coins sitting still are dead weight. Their real power came from movement. Credit moved, information moved, trust moved, capital moved. And whoever could direct that movement gained extraordinary influence. This reveals another principle hidden inside the history of wealth. Money is most powerful when it becomes infrastructure. The richest strategist is not necessarily the person holding the largest pile of cash. It may be the person positioned at the intersection through which everyone else's cash must travel. That is why financial power so often concentrates around intermediaries. The banker, the marketplace, the exchange, the platform, the distributor, the lender, the insurer, the owner of critical infrastructure, the person who controls the bridge between supply and demand. The bridge collects a toll, and the toll can become a fortune. But there is an even darker lesson. Machiavelli knew that dependence creates vulnerability. If your wealth depends entirely upon one client, one employer, one platform, one supplier, one political environment, or one financial institution, you do not fully control your wealth. You are borrowing stability from someone else. Cinematic image of a lone merchant standing on a stone bridge, while multiple roads diverge behind him into a storm-darkened landscape. The fatal mistake is not losing the battle. It is revealing that you have only one battlefield. A sovereign strategist creates options. Options are hidden wealth. The person with one source of income must protect that source desperately. The person with several sources of value can negotiate. The person with no savings must accept unfavorable terms. The person with reserves can wait. The person with no network must accept whoever opens the door. The person with relationships can create another entrance. Time itself becomes leverage when you can afford to wait. This is why wealth is partly a psychological weapon, not because money makes someone inherently superior, but because financial independence changes the decisions a person can afford to make. A desperate person negotiates differently from a patient person. A person drowning in debt evaluates risk differently from a person with reserves. A person terrified of losing a job behaves differently from a person who has built transferable skills. Money therefore changes not only what you can buy, it changes what you can refuse. And the ability to refuse is one of the foundations of sovereignty. Cinematic close-up of a Renaissance ruler silently refusing a sealed contract while candlelight flickers across his expression. Machiavelli understood refusal. He understood that power often belongs to the person who can walk away. This principle reaches far beyond politics. In business, negotiation, investing, employment, and entrepreneurship, the strongest position is often created before the negotiation begins. If you desperately need the deal, the other side senses it. If you can survive without the deal, the balance changes. If you have alternatives, the balance changes again. If the other side needs what you uniquely control, the balance changes dramatically. This is leverage through optionality, and optionality is one of the least understood forms of wealth. People often chase money directly when they should be building options. Learn a skill that increases your bargaining power. Build relationships that open doors. Create intellectual property that can be reused. Develop a reputation that reduces the cost of acquiring trust. Save capital so you can act when others cannot. Build systems that continue operating without your constant presence. Each one creates another layer of independence. Eventually, the objective changes. You are no longer merely trying to earn. You are constructing a position from which earning becomes easy.